4:18 a.m. over the East China Sea. A Japanese surveillance drone holds steady at cruising altitude, its sensors sweeping a quiet stretch of water where shipping lanes and air corridors overlap. Inside a control room on the mainland, operators watch clean telemetry until the numbers begin to flicker. Signal strength dips, video feed stutters, then a warning flashes. Unsafe proximity. This is not a missile launch. No explosion lights the horizon, but something far more unsettling is happening. An unidentified aircraft closes in aggressively, slicing through the drone's flight path with meters to spare. For a few seconds, the entire mission balances on a single decision: hold position and risk losing control, or pull back and concede the sky. Japan deployed drones to reduce danger. So why does this moment feel like a strike? If modern warfare no longer needs gunfire to force retreat, what does attack really mean now? The East China Sea has never been just water. It is a compressed strategic space where geography, history, and military doctrine collide daily. To Japan, this airspace is a front line without trenches. Critical shipping lanes run beneath it, feeding one of the world's most trade-dependent economies. Island chains stretch westward like stepping stones, turning air patrols into early warning systems rather than mere presence missions. Every unidentified aircraft, every unusual flight path is treated not as an anomaly, but as a data point in a much larger pattern. Over the past decade, that pattern has intensified. Scramble numbers have surged. Encounters have become closer, faster, and more frequent. What once involved manned patrol aircraft now demands constant availability, something pilots and airframes cannot sustain indefinitely. Surveillance drones offered a solution: long endurance, persistent coverage, fewer human lives at immediate risk. For Tokyo, deploying unmanned surveillance platforms is not about provocation. It is about stability through visibility. If you can see earlier, you can react slower and avoid panic-driven decisions. At least that is the theory. But deterrence works both ways. From the opposite perspective, persistent drones are not passive observers. They are extensions of a surveillance network that feeds targeting data, operational planning, and strategic forecasting. This is where the strategic balance becomes fragile. Unlike fighter jets, drones do not carry pilots who can gesture, warn, or improvise in close encounters. Their vulnerability is not physical alone, it is systemic. Data links, sensor feeds, control latency. Interrupt any one of these and the aircraft becomes a liability rather than an asset. That reality turns the East China Sea into a laboratory for modern power projection, not through bombs or dogfights, but through proximity interference and calculated risk. The goal is no longer to shoot down an aircraft, but to make its mission untenable. Japan's drone deployment sits precisely at that fault line. Designed to lower risk, it instead introduces a new question: can unmanned surveillance survive in contested airspace without becoming the first casualty of a conflict no one officially wants? And if it cannot, what does that say about the future of deterrence itself? Preparation for a surveillance mission begins long before the drone ever leaves the runway. Hours earlier, planners define corridors that minimize risk without sacrificing coverage. Altitude blocks are selected to balance sensor performance against exposure. Inside the control facility, the mood is quiet, but focused. Operators cycle through checklists they know by memory: link integrity, satellite relay status, fallback control modes. One screen shows the drone's projected route. Another displays nearby traffic patterns. A third monitors signal health in real time. Nothing here looks dramatic. That's exactly the point. From Japan's perspective, intelligence gathering is not about chasing targets. It is about persistence. The value of the drone lies in what it sees over hours, not seconds. Repeated observation reveals patterns: how often aircraft appear, how they space themselves, how quickly they react to changes. This kind of intelligence is cumulative, built flight by flight. But preparation is not one-sided. Across the sea, observers study the same routine from a different angle. They note launch windows, loiter times, and the drone's tendency to favor certain altitudes. Even unmanned systems develop habits. A senior analyst reviewing recent flights notices something subtle. The drone's route has become more confident, less deviation longer holds over sensitive areas. Confidence in military planning is a signal. It suggests that decision makers believe the risk is manageable. That belief invites testing. On the day of the encounter, nothing unusual appears in the early indicators. No abnormal traffic, no warnings from civilian air control. The drone proceeds as planned, its sensors feeding a clean picture back to the mainland. Then a deviation appears on a secondary display. A fast-moving contact on an intercept vector, not hostile, not declared, but deliberate. The kind of approach that exists in a gray zone where intentions are never stated, only demonstrated. The first indication that the situation is changing does not come from the primary radar display. It comes from the margin secondary telemetry background indicators most missions never require. The drone maintains altitude, speed, steady sensors locked on their assigned sector. Then the intercept vector tightens. The unknown aircraft is no longer passing through the area. It is aligning. Inside the control room, voices drop. One operator calls out the closure rate. Another watches the signal graph flatten, then dip. The data link hasn't failed, but it is no longer clean. The aircraft approaches from below and behind, climbing fast. On the drone's sensors, its outline sharpens. Distance collapses from kilometers to hundreds of meters. This is not coincidence. This is intent. There is still no missile warning, no radar lock tone, no act that would justify an immediate defensive response, and that is precisely what makes this moment so effective. The drone's automated safety logic begins to assert itself. Proximity thresholds trigger advisories. Control software suggests evasive routing to preserve airframe integrity. At the same time, signal interference intensifies, subtle, intermittent, just enough to introduce delay. Commands arrive milliseconds late. Video frames skip. The mission commander faces a narrowing set of options: hold course and risk losing positive control if the link degrades further. Alter altitude and reveal operating envelopes that had remained ambiguous. Abort the mission and concede the airspace, at least for today. This is the strike. Not a weapon impact, but a forced decision under pressure. As the aircraft crosses the drone's projected path again closer, this time the message becomes unmistakable. The mission can continue only at escalating risk. In the control room, the order is given. The drone alters course. Its turn is gradual, calculated to avoid sudden maneuvers that might worsen signal stability. Altitude is adjusted upward, buying separation, but sacrificing sensor resolution. The intercepting aircraft maintains proximity just long enough to confirm the response, then peels away. Within minutes, the immediate danger passes. Telemetry stabilizes. The video feed clears. On the surface, nothing has been lost. The drone is intact. No official incident has occurred. But the mission is no longer the same. What was meant to be a routine surveillance flight has been reshaped in real time. Boundaries have been tested, reactions measured, assumptions challenged. The drone did not fail, but it was compelled to yield. That outcome will be studied carefully on both sides. For one, it proves that unmanned surveillance can be disrupted without escalation. For the other, it confirms that persistence alone does not guarantee control. This was not a rehearsal for war, it was a demonstration of leverage. And in the quiet aftermath, as systems return to normal, one question lingers: if a single encounter can alter a mission so decisively, what happens when these encounters stop being rare? Operationally, adjustments follow fast. Escort options are reviewed for future missions, not to deter with force, but to complicate intercept geometry. Flight profiles are modified, altitude bands rotated, loiter points shifted, timing randomized. The goal is not confrontation, it is unpredictability. At the same time, contingency thresholds are revised. How close is too close? How much signal delay is acceptable before a mission becomes unsafe? These lines had existed before, but now they are informed by experience, not theory. Diplomatic channels move in parallel but quietly. Incidents like this rarely lead with accusations. Instead, they are logged, referenced, and added to a growing pattern of behavior. The language is measured, the tone controlled. Escalation is avoided not because the event was insignificant, but because it was precisely calibrated to remain deniable. From a defensive standpoint, the outcome is mixed. Japan retains its drone. No hardware is lost. No dramatic confrontation unfolds. Yet a boundary has been enforced not by law or firepower, but by pressure. The message is subtle but effective. Persistent surveillance will be challenged in ways that shift risk back onto the operator. That realization forces a broader reassessment. If unmanned systems are to remain viable in contested airspace, they must be defended not just physically but conceptually through doctrine that anticipates interference as a primary threat, not a secondary nuisance. Because in this environment, the most dangerous moment is not when something explodes. It is when nothing does and behavior still changes. What made this encounter effective was not sophistication, it was precision. The strike unfolded along 3 technical pressure points that define modern unmanned operations: proximity signal integrity and decision latency. None required weapons, all required timing. First, proximity. Unmanned aircraft rely on pre-programmed safety envelopes to avoid collision. When another aircraft deliberately operates just inside those margins, the drone's own systems begin to work against the mission. Advisory logic escalates. Automation suggests course changes. Even without hostile intent, the aircraft becomes a moving constraint that compresses options. Second, signal integrity. Long-endurance drones depend on stable data links, often satellite relays with inherent latency. Minor interference, even brief and intermittent, can introduce enough delay to disrupt precise control. Commands arrive late. Video feeds skip frames. The operator is forced to act conservatively because hesitation risks losing positive control altogether. Third, decision latency. In manned aircraft, a pilot can improvise instantly. In unmanned systems, every action passes through layers operator software safeguards. When time compresses, those layers become friction. The strike succeeds the moment that friction outweighs the mission's value. Together, these factors create a powerful asymmetry. The interceptor spends little fuel, exposes minimal capability, and retains plausible deniability. The drone operator, by contrast, absorbs risk, technical, political, and reputational, with every additional second on station. This is why the encounter matters beyond the East China Sea. It demonstrates how contested airspace no longer requires air defense missiles to be denied. Control can be asserted through behavior and physics rather than firepower. The sky becomes a negotiation space, not a battlefield, until someone miscalculates. For Japan, the lesson is not that drones are ineffective. It is that drones shift vulnerability from pilots to systems, and systems can be stressed quietly. For others, watching the message is even clearer. In future conflicts, the first strike may not destroy anything at all. It may simply force the other side to blink. The ripple effects of the encounter spread far beyond a single flight path. In the days that follow, regional air activity does not decrease, it becomes more cautious. Patrols continue, but patterns shift. Routes are adjusted, timings vary. What had once been routine surveillance now carries an added layer of calculation, not because of new weapons, but because of a newly demonstrated method of control. For Japan, the immediate impact is doctrinal. Drone operations are no longer treated as a low-risk substitute for manned patrols, but as contested missions in their own right. This elevates the importance of layered responses, escort options, redundant data links, and clearer thresholds for disengagement. The goal is resilience, maintaining presence without inviting unnecessary escalation. Across the region, others take note. States operating in similar airspace recognize the pattern. If pressure can force a modern drone to yield without a single shot, the same approach can be applied elsewhere. Surveillance flights once seen as stabilizing now carry the risk of becoming flashpoints. The sky grows more crowded, but also more sensitive. Strategically, this dynamic tightens the escalation ladder. When outcomes are decided by behavior rather than force, misinterpretation becomes more likely. A maneuver meant to signal resolve can be read as provocation. A routine adjustment can look like retreat. Each side operates closer to the edge even while insisting on restraint. The encounter over the East China Sea did not redraw borders or trigger alliances, but it subtly redefined what control looks like in contested airspace. Power is no longer measured solely by what you can destroy, but by how reliably you can compel the other side to change behavior. And once that lesson is learned, it does not remain local for long. What happened over the East China Sea was not an accident, and it was not an isolated incident. It was a demonstration, quiet, controlled, and deliberately ambiguous. Japan deployed surveillance drones to reduce risk, extend visibility, and stabilize a crowded airspace. In purely technical terms, the mission succeeded. The drone survived. No weapons were fired. This is the new reality of modern conflict. Strikes no longer need explosions to be effective. They only need to force decisions. By exploiting proximity signal fragility, and the inherent latency of unmanned systems, an opponent can reshape behavior while maintaining plausible deniability. For the region, the warning is broader. As surveillance becomes more persistent and airspace more crowded, the margin between deterrence and miscalculation narrows. Encounters like this one will become more frequent, not less. And when control is asserted without gunfire, escalation becomes harder to define and harder to stop. The most dangerous strikes of the future may leave no wreckage, no smoke, no clear culprit, only changed behavior. And in strategic terms, that is often enough. Bye for now.